Well, tonight, we want to take the word for a few minutes, so why don't you take your Bibles and let's go to the book of Psalms. Psalm 100 tonight. I just want to challenge each of us to consider some things going into the coming week that lies before us. We call this a season of Thanksgiving. But I want to remind us of the fact that, brothers and sisters, Thanksgiving does not happen by accident. It doesn't happen by accident. I mean, just because this next week has a label over it in our calendars, just because there's a day set aside in which we say we give thanks to God, does not actually ensure that you and I will engage genuinely in heartfelt giving of thanks. I would like to think that giving thanks is kind of as easy as falling into a ditch. It just kind of happens. But it doesn't. I mean, if you think it through with me, genuine biblical thanksgiving is not produced instantaneously by the smell of turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and your favorite baked desserts. I just did a little experiment this week as I was preparing for services, and I did a quick Google search. You know, Google's kind of the master of every bit of information, right? So here's what I did. I said, okay, let's look up Thanksgiving on Google Images. Like, what pictures come up as the most popular images for Thanksgiving? And I think the first 37 were pictures of turkeys, baked turkeys on a table. That in the American mind, Thanksgiving has to do with a menu, not praise to God. It has to do with what you're going to eat, or what you're going to watch, or who you're going to hang out with. As if somehow you smell that and suddenly your heart just lifts in praise. Or maybe you think in terms of getting family together in the same room, and suddenly just the warmth of family togetherness is going to produce genuine worship of God. Or depending on who you are, we think maybe that Thanksgiving is going to be produced by the seasonal decorations, right? Leaves have turned and decorations are out, and therefore Thanksgiving is produced. Or maybe for you like sports, so the sound of a ref's whistle after you've had a nice big turkey dinner, that's what produces Thanksgiving in you. Or maybe you're a hunter, and so the smell of gunpowder in the cool, crisp air, that's what produces Thanksgiving in your heart. Or maybe you love winter, and the thought of the first snowflakes falling on the week of Thanksgiving, oh, that would be amazing. And suddenly, that's going to produce worship. You see, to many of us, we've bought the lie of the culture that Thanksgiving is merely an experience of a holiday. It's produced by the things that we have come to expect at this time of year. But as I just said, we have to understand, friends, that true biblical thanksgiving does not just happen because the mood is right. The decor is out. The family's together. So we have to ask the question, what then actually produces thanksgiving in the hearts of God's people? And understanding that, what I want to do is I just want to spend a few minutes tonight knowing this struggle of our hearts, if we're honest with the wrestling of our own souls, and how often we just kind of relegate these big, true Christian theological ideas to a day on a calendar, on a particular time of the year, in a particular setting, and we just assume that because it's on my calendar, it's actually going to happen. It's actually going to happen. I've asked you to turn to Psalm 100 because I just want you to look at this familiar psalm with me, because there's such helpful truth in it for us. Because we all know as believers that Thanksgiving is not a one-day-a-year experience. It should not be something we participate in rarely. It should be a norm for us, and yet many times it's just not. So what does God say to His people about this idea? Psalm 100, let's just look at this. It's just 5 verses. Let me read them. You follow along. Here's what we read. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into His presence with singing. Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. Enter into His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him. Bless His name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations. The psalm is just made up of 5 verses. I think it is absolutely full of truth that is intended to help prepare the hearts of genuine believers to thank God, to give genuine thanks to their God. The first thing I want you to note here is that there's a command that we're given here. It's not merely a command to be obeyed, but it actually commands a spirit within God's people. Notice the language in verse 1. Make a joyful noise. Make a joyful noise. Now, I can't speak with certainty to what noises have been coming from your mouth and really from your heart of late. I have noted how many of these memes, these pictures that they lay words over there are, and how we've begun to make fun of 2020. And so, there's the hairdos of 2020, or the official piñata of 2020. It's like a hornet's nest or something like that. There's all these things we're joking about. And I just wondered, if there was one for sounds, what would the sound of 2020 be? Would it be the moans and the groans of agony, kind of like the guy in the pit of despair on The Princess Bride, right? Would that be the sound that comes out of us? And God says, make a joyful noise, and we say, I'm not sure I have it in me. I mean, joy, that seems like a distant memory. It's been a long time since I've been moved with a heart that was overwhelmed with the joy that comes from the presence of the Lord. The pain and the struggle and the discouragement and the disappointments of this year have begun to overwhelm my soul, and what comes from me isn't joyful, it's a sorrowful moan. I mentioned to you last few weeks the losses that we have known. I actually got an email this week asking. They said, you can't get to Guam, but would you make a video that we can show the family and the church that just remembers your friend Don who died? Can you make something? And I tried like about 14 times today to make a video. And I wanted to rejoice with them. He's home. But what comes out isn't sounding very joyful right now. Some of you guys know that. You feel that. And then God says, make a joyful noise. He's not merely commanding words. He's not merely commanding we paint on a smile. He's talking about a soul that is producing a response to truth that actually evokes a right spirit from us. And I just have to ask, how are we responding? What's coming out of us right now? What's the spirit from which these things are flowing? Make a joyful noise to the Lord. Serve the Lord with, next word, gladness. Oh, wow, now we're on a roll. I mean, think about this. The kind of things that we find ourselves responding to life with. And what does he say? Be joyful and glad. And we say, I don't know about that. It doesn't sound very realistic in this year of all years, right? I mean, we're struggling. That's what I said. I think some of us are hoping that we start to smell turkey and hear whistles at the football games, and suddenly we're going to be moved to rejoice because we really can't right now. And we get the decorations out, and suddenly something in me is going to magically change. We hope that circumstances are altered, and therefore my soul produces what it ought to produce. How about this one? Come into His presence with singing. You see, this singing is the product of an expression of a genuinely glad and joyful heart. So what happens? The heart that's joyful and glad sings, and He calls us to it. And yet I know how often we find ourselves, and this isn't the only year that some of us have ever struggled at this time of year to respond as we ought to our God, and yet, this, again, we said this is the time of year we stop and we meditate on it, but this is to be a truth that's perpetual. It's all year long. This isn't supposed to be a rarity. This is supposed to be a normal response of God's people. On top of singing, we're told in verse 4, to enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise, and to bless His name. I mean, we start to see this description of joy and gladness and singing and praise and blessing and thanksgiving. And I think to some of us it sounds kind of glib and fake and put on, and I'm not really sure that this really is what I want to engage in, because what do I just want to do what I feel, right? I feel sour, so I don't want to have to smile. I feel sad, so I don't want to have to sing. I'm not really happy. I don't want to try to talk about joy and singing. There's just something in hearts that resists this, sadly. But I want you to notice not only the spirit that is commanded by God in His people, but secondly, I want you to note in the psalm what the psalmist says motivates such a response. What is it that actually produces these things, these responses in the hearts of genuine Christians, those who know God? What produces thanksgiving and praise and gladness and joy and singing in God's people? Well, in verse 3, I want you to notice that the psalmist tells us that the Lord is God. He goes straight to the character of the one who made us. What rejoices the hearts of His people? Notice He doesn't say, look back at your calendar and your list of moans and pains and worries. He says, look at your God. Look at your God. The Lord is God, verse 3. And not only is He God, He begins to lay out what kind of a God He is. He's a creator God. He made you, right? It is He who made us. He's the creator. He goes on to say in that same verse, He is the sovereign. We are His. We are His people. He's the king over us. We're not our own. He's the Lord over us. And not only is He the creator and the sovereign, it also tells us here that He's the shepherd. Notice what He says, and the sheep of His pasture. He is the kind of God who lovingly shepherds the hearts and lives and souls of His people. It addresses the fact that He is God, but it addresses the kind of God that He is. And so we have to start asking ourselves the question, then when we refuse to rejoice, what is it we're actually doing? We're refusing to acknowledge what is true of God. Oh, He may be God, but He gave us this year. He may be God, but He took my friend. He may be God, but I don't feel very secure by the shepherd, right? I mean, just look at this life. Look at what's going on. What are we doing? We're not just observing a landscape of life and situation and circumstances that's kind of rough right now. We're actually questioning the character of our Maker. We're denying things that are true of God. You see, the psalmist doesn't merely tell us that he is God, but I want you to see that in verse 5, the psalmist goes on to add a second reality. The Lord isn't just God, the Lord is good. He is good. Notice what he says in verse 5. The Lord is good, His steadfast love endures forever. And His faithfulness endures to all generations. You see, one of my concerns I've been sharing with you the last few weeks is that what I continue to observe, I think, in the broader scope of what we call Christendom in our day, many professing Christians, is that we're buying into all the nonsense that those who aren't Christians are saying about the year, right? They're saying stuff that is actually godless. They're saying stuff that are responses of people who don't know the Creator, who don't understand that there's a sovereign God over all, who, by the way, folks, if you've been reading your Bible, this year is just par for the course. Do you understand that, right? Like this year is evidence that God keeps His word because He told us it would get worse. Yet we sit here as if we are owed something better, and so responses often are godless responses. They're faithless responses. And they're being echoed many times by those who would say they belong to God. And while we would never be as audacious as to say God is not good, we just leave God out of the equation altogether. And in doing so, we not only deny Him, but we deny His character, His goodness. Friends, I don't want you to miss the reality that these truths are what God intends to anchor the souls of God's people and motivate our thanks and our praise to Him. Do you ever notice that what you meditate on is typically what you talk about? Have you found that? Like what's on your mind comes out your mouth, right? It's true for me. I mean, the things I'm thinking about, the things I'm concerned about, the things I'm reading or studying or working through with my family, or the things I'm mulling over in my brain and trying to figure out. You know what? Those things find their way into most of my conversations, right? Because I tend to be a verbal processor, and that's just how it works. I talk about the things I'm thinking about. And most of us are that way. And this is why Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's how it works. What we're thinking about in our hearts is what finds its way across our lips. And so I find that one of the best tests for me as to whether or not I am thinking about the right things, I'm thinking truth, is whether or not the right things or truth is what's coming out of my mouth. Question. What do you find yourself talking about the most these days? What just keeps finding its way to the surface of your life? And then ask yourself, is it praise to God? Is it thanks to God? Is it singing? Is it blessing? Or is it all the other stuff? And I'll be one of the first to admit more often than I would like to acknowledge, what finds its way to the surface of my life and finds its way out of my mouth is not the spirit that the psalmist calls for in the people of God, a spirit of blessing and joy and praise, but often a spirit of fear and a spirit of discontent. It's all kinds of the other stuff, right? That is often where we find ourselves. And yet the psalmist would remind us that these truths about God are to be the anchor for our souls and the motivation for our praise. And this is why I said what becomes so tricky for us is because we are the professing people of God, we assume that when the day comes that we've set aside to call Thanksgiving, well, of course, once the mood's right, what's going to come out is praise. But I would submit to you that Thanksgiving never happens by accident. You and I do not stumble into Thanksgiving. We don't trip over it. It's not like falling down the stairs. It's like climbing up the stairs. It's an intentional choice to meditate on the truth of God in such a way that it totally transforms the way I'm thinking, so that now, though I can rehearse all of the junk that's going on in my life, I find myself praising God over and even for it all. Why? Because He is God and He is always good. Always good. So in order to prepare ourselves for Thanksgiving, I've told you, we're going to come together Sunday. One of my goals, and I love this coming Sunday. I love the Sunday before Thanksgiving because we always try to set aside time. And what we found is this time can go on and on for our church as we share with one another what God has done. And honestly, there was a moment this week when I thought, will it be the same this year? I just found myself going, will it be the same? Because it's been kind of a cruddy year, right? Like, will we come Sunday ready to praise God, or will we come Sunday just panting, trying to survive, right? Like how will we come into a time we are dedicating to the praise of God? So what I'm encouraging us to do is to think and to pray and to plan, so that when we come together and we lift our praise to Him at the Lord's table, and as we think through these things, then offer praise, that we're ready to do so. And it's not like we're trying to put a Band-Aid on a gushing arterial wound. Going, well, maybe I can share a praise that'll fix it all. No, it's actually praise that flows from the soul of one who has been basking in the glory and the grace and the goodness of God. Can I ask you, are we basking in His goodness? Or are we desperately just trying to see through the fog? I don't say this as somebody who's got this mastered, brothers and sisters. I don't. I honestly have found many times this year that I have wrestled just like anyone around me has. And I've found the last couple of weeks in particular especially hard. I found myself with several of my friends and loved ones that have gone on. I've gone between two extremes. One extreme, sorrow, not hopeless sorrow, but sorrow for the loss, and then at the next moment, extreme jealousy. That they're with Jesus, and I'm still here. And then to realize He's good to us both. Do we think like this? Do we preach the gospel to ourselves? Do we remind ourselves of what is true? Or do we find ourselves down and rolling around and moaning in the midst of the pain and the sorrow? Or do we trust our God is always good and He never fails to be our God? So in preparation for Thanksgiving this Sunday and this coming week, could I encourage you to meditate on truth? Not opinions, not all the stuff that's just getting spewed by so many voices. Like we can meditate on 1,000 things besides truth, right? We can. We do. Like I find my mind quickly racing to, I heard this and I heard truth. Truth. Do we meditate on truth? So how do you prepare your soul to give thanks? How do you prepare your soul to praise? Well, let me say this to you. Get into the Word. Get into the Word. Read the Word. Meditate on the Word. Pray the Word. Sing the Word. Discuss the Word, right? Get into the Word. Meditate on the truth. And as our psalmist told us in this text, let the truths of the godness and the goodness of God sink down deep into your souls. There's one God and you're not Him. There's one God and I'm not Him. So let the godness of God and let the goodness of God transform the way that you and I are thinking in the midst of a season that is very, very challenging to us all. And let the realities of who He is and what He's like elicit a joyful and a glad and a thankful song of blessing. Elicit praise to Him from the depths of your heart and your mind. May He receive the glory as His people find themselves looking where they ought to be looking, thinking as they ought to be thinking, when responding to those things as they ought to be responding. See, that's thanksgiving, right? That's praise. That's blessing. That produces singing from His people. So I would plead with you, as you prepare your heart and your mind for days we set aside to give thanks to God, that we would do so in a way that will actually produce thanks and praise to God. And my prayer is that as we do so, He will receive the glory and we will know the good from His producing those things in the hearts and bringing those things out from the souls, the minds, and even the mouths of His people in these days to come. Can we pray together like that, to that end? That would be true of you and of me and of us collectively as we give thanks to God this week. All right?